I had my second ACL surgery, and I think the words still ring true in my head. My surgeon, who's a wonderful man, he'd done both ACL surgeries. He goes, "Have you ever read the book about the guy who had 8 ACL surgeries?" And I said, "No," and it was some NFL guy who's had it. But he said, "Don't be that guy," is what he said to me. And then he said, "Look, the second one didn't go as well as we wanted." And he said, "You're going to always walk with a limp." Like, we couldn't quite get everything cleaned up that we needed to, whatever that meant.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. I'm your host, Lee Brandon. This work started for me several decades ago when I started to see the impact I could make on people, helping them to identify the root cause of their health problems that no doctor could figure out, including serious back, knee, shoulder and neck injuries, acne and eczema issues, severe gut health problems, even helping couples get pregnant after several IVF treatments had failed. And it really moves me to be able to help people in this way. And that is why I do what I do and why we have this show. Welcome back to another episode of the Radical Health Rebel podcast, where we dive deep into transformative health discussions that challenge conventional wisdom. Today, we have an incredibly enlightening conversation lined up for you. In this episode, I'm joined by Ann Shivas, an expert in quantum healing and chronic pain reduction. Ann brings a unique perspective on how we can heal from chronic pain by understanding the deeper layers of our existence. We explore the fascinating world of quantum wave healing, a method that taps into the subtle energies of the body to promote healing. Ann and I discuss how a lack of abundance in various aspects of life can manifest as chronic pain and delve into the concept of self-sabotage, how our subconscious mind might be hindering our healing journey. We also differentiate between what creates chronic pain and what leads to acute pain, offering insights into how these types of pain arise and persist. Most importantly, we talk about chronic pain reduction strategies via quantum wave healing. Whether you're someone struggling with chronic pain or simply curious about the interplay between the quantum realm and physical healing, this episode is packed with insights that could change your perspective on pain management. Let's jump right into this transformative conversation with Ann Shivas. Ann Shivas, welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here, Ann. And to kick things off, could you share a little bit about your background and perhaps your educational and professional background and your own personal story with chronic pain?
Yeah, so I guess my story with chronic pain would start back in the good old soccer days or football days. And I'd been playing pro soccer. I went over to Australia to play in the first pro women's soccer league, and I just had torn up my knee, actually. And you know, it was a little tear, and I started with a little tear and didn't quite have the rehab that we'd really have today. Like, that wasn't really available in that time. And so kind of kept playing, kept kind of doing the rehab that I was supposed to do and so on. And that led down into 2 ACL surgeries in the future, to fast forward a little bit. And with that, I had my second ACL surgery, and I think the words still ring true in my head. My surgeon, who's a wonderful man, he'd done both ACL surgeries. He goes, "Have you ever read the book about the guy who had 8 ACL surgeries?" And I said, "No," and it was some NFL guy who's had it. But he said, "Don't be that guy," is what he said to me. And then he said, "Look, the second one didn't go as well as we wanted," because I had my meniscus done as well. And he said, "You're going to always walk with a limp. Like, we couldn't quite get everything cleaned up that we needed to, whatever that meant. And you're going to walk with a limp." And I was sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, okay, so my career just ended. I have to walk with a limp for the rest of my life. I thought it was game-changing that day. And then I decided I'm going to go down a path of rehab. I went into an osteopath who's amazing, and lo and behold, I walk out without a limp. And he said something to me around, Ann, and look, it's like, it's all the energy you carry. Like, if you believe you're going to walk with a limp, you will. And if you don't, you won't. And I was saying, okay, mindset, I get it. Yeah. But I'll get into, you know, the deeper parts of that later. And then I became an osteopath because I was like, ooh, this is totally going to help everybody heal themselves. I can help people heal. And I opened a clinic, had my little clinic going, and I was helping people. Don't get me wrong. But then I saw people coming in with the same reoccurring patterns all the time. And I thought, well, okay, what am I missing here? And I said, I'm missing their DNA. I got to know everything about, nutrition, their environment, them as a person. I have to really understand and help them get through their whatever they're living. And I thought, okay, nutrition is going to help, mobility is going to help. And all those things did help. And so I went into my PhD in epigenetics to try to understand people really at the end of the day. And I do. And after that, I thought, okay, well, there's got to be something more. And I had never touched on, an energetic component, if you will, or some people will call it, connection to source component. And that was the part that I've been really diving into the last 5 or 6 years. And what it's done for me is help me see humans differently, help us see us as a bit more of a whole being. And the funny thing to backtrack on that is that's one of the parts of osteopathy is to look at the body as a whole human. I just didn't know what that meant. Like, I just thought it was the body at that time, right? And then, it's so much more than that. So that was kind of my journey on it. And now I live without any pain. At all. I can manage my own pain on a daily basis. And I actually believe that we don't ever need to live with chronic pain ever. And so I can dive into why a little bit later.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So how long did you study osteopathy?
So osteo would have been a 4-year program. 4 years part-time, 2 years full-time. And then I got into, after that, actually, my prof in that, he was a really good businessman. So he taught us how to all open our own businesses. And we have, really great osteopaths thriving in our area because of him. And with that, I think you naturally attract what you are. So I was attracting all these athletes. I was working with athletes from Cirque du Soleil. I was working with, pro hockey athletes at the time, and seeing all these injuries and so on. And I had people, believing concussions was a big one at that time too. And so I had just people believing, okay, well, I've had this concussion. I'm going to be living with this for the rest of my life. How do I, and the language at the time was, how do I manage it? How do I manage living with this? So if we take the belief system, the belief is, well, I'm going to have this anyway. I just need to figure out how to live like this. And so when I went into the whole body component, it was, got a little bit deeper. It was like, well, actually, how can we exchange out the belief system pattern of what they're expressing? Because the more, we ingrain it into our minds, like, I have pain, I have a concussion, we start to like make it part of our identity, right? And with that identity, we'll go out and we'll actually look for things to confirm that identity in ourselves. And so, everyone starts creating concussion clubs, which I have nothing wrong with that. But, so you're part of a concussion club, and then everyone comes in and talks about their concussions. And my whole question about it was, well, what if you actually didn't believe you had it? What if you actually could exchange out the energy of the belief system? What if you could change your belief systems and move forward and actually, heal parts of yourself that you're living, and so that example isn't to rip apart all the concussion people, by the way, at all. I know it's a process, but the belief systems have to change, and when the belief systems change, and even the emotion around it can change as well, we get a new person, we get a brand new person. So they have to believe first that they can heal. And that they're capable in their body of doing it. If they don't believe that, then they'll probably want to be working with people for the rest of their lives potentially. But they can exchange it out for sure.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's quite interesting. Yeah. I interviewed someone 2 days ago about concussions.
Oh, there we go.
Which is interesting, but it was more to do with the prevention rather than what to do afterwards. So yeah, if anyone wants to go into concussions, have a dive into the previous episode, because we go into
I want to listen
into detail on concussions. But I completely agree that the mind and our emotions play such a massive role when it comes to pain, and there are so many kind of facets to that as well. And, I've been very conscious of it when working with people over the years. And, a story that I've told, again, many times before, but the one that springs to mind is a guy I'd been treating, or basically doing manual therapy on, who was training to do his first ever marathon in his mid-40s. And he rang me one day. He was in the south of France, and it's very hilly in the south of France. And so he was running up and down these hills. And he said, my back is so sore, I can't even walk. And it was, it wasn't that long out from his first ever marathon. And so he came back to the UK, came in to see me. Now, at the time, my treatment room was 4 flights up and there was no elevator. So he had to stumble up these 4 flights of stairs. And he got into my treatment room, and one of the first things he said to me is, am I going to be able to do this marathon? And it was 6 weeks away. And my first thought, looking at him walking up the stairs, because I'm walking behind him, I'm assessing his gait as he's walking up the stairs. And my mind said to me, are you kidding? Like, you can't even walk. How are you going to run 26 miles? But then I kind of caught myself and said, if I say to him, no, you can't run this marathon, it's probably not going to happen, right? And who am I to tell him that he can't do it, right? So I said, I kind of thought to myself, I need to leave the door open for him to be able to do it, because, I've seen so many times in the last 28 years I've been doing this work that when you give the body what it needs, it can perform miracles. And I've seen it time and time and time again. So I said to him, now, to be honest, I didn't believe what I was saying, but I wanted to leave the door open for his mind to believe. And I said, you remember what I said to you right at the beginning? And he was like, I do remember. And what I'd said to him right at the beginning was, it's all well and good coming in and getting your calves treated every week because your calves are tight from all the running. I said, but what you really need a full holistic program. You need exercise, you need strengthening, you need to change your diet, X, Y, and Z. And at the time, he said, oh, it's too expensive. It's too expensive. I'll just come in every week and you can just treat me. So I said to him, well, look, if 6 weeks out from the marathon, if you want me to do a full assessment on you, write you a specific exercise program, and also I'll work with you to improve your diet, make sure you're really optimizing your sleep, then I'll give you a 50% chance of being able to do the marathon. Now, when I said that, I thought I was being very generous, right? But as I said, I wanted to leave that door open for his mind to be able to believe that there was some possibility. So I assessed him, gave him an exercise program. He had a diet plan to follow, but he was still coming in for treatment. And each of the weeks he was coming in, his weight was just dropping off and dropping off and dropping. And it was good weight. It was, his excess body fat that was dropping off him. And a few days before he was flying out to Germany to do the marathon, I think he came to see me on the Thursday and he was flying on the Friday. And he said, right, let's make a decision on the Thursday as to whether I'm going to run or not. I said, yeah, okay, fine. Now, his mileage was still very low at this point, but I knew he'd got a lot of mileage in his legs. And he came in, I treated him. He was not too bad. Wasn't in, if I remember rightly, he wasn't in much pain or hardly any pain. And he said, what do you think? And again, I'm still thinking, you shouldn't really be doing this, right? So that's probably my ego mind thinking, you probably shouldn't be doing it. And I said to him, look, why not fly to Germany? You've got your tickets anyway. Fly to Germany, get to the start line, do your warm up, get to the start line, start running. And if anything starts hurting, just stop. There's always going to be other marathons. You don't have to complete this one. It might just be a learning process for the next one. And he said, that sounds like a good plan. Right. So that Sunday I was at home and I remember thinking, oh, I wonder how he's getting on. This was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And about 5 seconds after I had that thought, my phone pinged. So I went to my phone and it was him. And he said something along the lines of, I've just finished the marathon. I'm not in any pain. And in fact, I don't even have any muscle soreness. Right. And that was someone 6 weeks earlier was in so much pain he could barely walk. Now, I strongly believe if I'd said to him on day one, forget it, it's not going to happen, he wouldn't have run it. It would never have happened. Now, I'm still amazed that he was able to do it, but it just shows you what's possible, right? Chris was 42 and training for his first marathon when he came to see me. His calf muscles were taking a beating from his long runs, and he initially wanted some manual therapy to ease the tension. I suggested he take a broader approach, a full exercise, nutrition, and lifestyle program to minimize his risk of injury and improve his performance. But Chris thought my rates were too expensive and politely declined. Fast forward a few months, and just 6 weeks out from his marathon, Chris suffered a debilitating back injury that left him unable to walk. He was devastated, feeling like all his hard work had gone to waste. Chris hobbled into my treatment room the next day, desperate to salvage his marathon dream. This time, he agreed to the full program that I'd been recommending. We started with a comprehensive physical assessment, and I designed an exercise, nutrition, and lifestyle plan tailored specifically to his needs. Full credit to Chris, he gave it his all, dedicating himself entirely to the program. 4 days prior to the race, Chris asked me if he was ready. I suggested he start the marathon, but to listen to his body as there would always be other races. On the afternoon of the race day, I received a text from Chris. He completed his marathon in an incredible 3 hours and 42 minutes with no back pain and barely any muscle soreness. Since then, Chris has gone on to run multiple marathons, achieving impressive times. If your back pain is keeping you from your goals, visit www.bodycheck.co.uk to find the root cause and get back to doing what you love.
Totally. And in that reminds me of a tool actually that I've used with people. And if you don't mind me going into this part, because it rings so true with me. It's so when I got into the energy work, I'm gonna go there because this is so important for people to understand. Is I thought I had it all when I was in osteo, and like you work on the body and you get their muscles going and things like that. But then, like you said, there's this other component of their belief systems and so on. And so I thought, okay, I'll go into genetics, and as far as I can go is their DNA. This is what I was thinking, but it's not true. Even beyond that is a quantum wave, and people are gonna, go, oh, okay, come on, Ann, and it's actually true because when we break down the body, we get electrons, okay? And the electron spins and it actually sends out a wave of energy. And what goes out must come back, right? And so in this situation, when I was listening to you, it's actually a really beautiful story. It's, what he wanted to do it so badly, something inside him that, he created mirrors around them. This is what we call a miracle. I was like, this is a miracle. The story that you're saying, people would call it, oh, that's a miracle. That's amazing. And it's true. They exist because what he admits out of him, his energy, he'll get back. So in that situation, you guys were mirroring each other's, positivity in a way, if you want to say that, or just even ability and belief system that he can do that he can complete it and so on. And so in a way, people think they have to live with the pain, but if they actually find, the energy that's blocked, if you will, or that's creating a certain pattern in their body and exchange it out for something new, they don't need to have pain in an instant. And so I thought, okay, people have to go on this healing journey. They need the 6 week, whatever. And myself, I need to live with, chronic knee pain for the rest of my life. And it wasn't just knee, it's like ankle, knee, hip, how it all goes together. And so I thought, okay, I need to live with that. Not going to play sport. And then, so when I got into understanding the patterns and it was on the right side of my body, right leg, and everything I'd chosen in my life up to then was creating that pain. I'm like, okay, I have to do something different. right? That's just inevitable. And I could stop or I could not play sport or what have you, but I had to actually go into the deeper patterns of what the energy was of living in my ankle, knee, hip joint. And so I'll share
Mm.
mine with you guys because I think it's important to understand. And I don't know if people will be able to make the connection, but my ankle was my stability in my life.
Mm.
Okay. The stability of how I was going to move forward in life. And it rings true to parts of my life at that time. And my knee was, how I'm actually moving forward, because that's what a knee joint
Mm-hmm.
does. Now, in saying this, people will be like, okay, I'm going to assess my knee and how I'm moving forward. I just want to say that, you know, genetically, everyone's different. So that pattern might not be yours and it might just be mine. We have to look at individual patterns, which I think now the world's got to personalize health. So we're good to go there, right? So how I'm moving forward. And then the hips was all about my empowerment because that's, where my power was coming from,
Mm.
right? And so I had to go back in my life and look at where I was diminishing these things, where I was denying it in myself, where I was, and probably blaming myself a little bit and putting myself down because, sometimes athletes do that. And I had to figure out how I needed to move forward without that
Mm.
and exchange the pattern out. So that quantum wave lives and keeps exchanging within you until you consciously exchange it out. And maybe your client could figure out his own way to do that. I don't know. But I worked with a method to actually exchange that energy out and put a new one in. And if people can picture that happening constantly and think about how many electrons we are, trillions, right? That's a lot of patterns
Mm.
exchanging at a certain period of time. So it's not just one pattern. It was, the pattern of my ankle that went back into my childhood, same with my knee, same with my hip. And I had to go back and learn, like, oh gosh, that's how Anne decided to live at that time. And then I'm going to come through all the ages I decided to live that and keep exchanging out at, I went through basically every age I got injured. And exchanged those out because I just kept living a repeating pattern. I could see
Mm.
it, 2 knee surgeries. Come on, same knee, same pattern. I didn't learn the first
Wow.
time. I just kept living the same pattern. So it was like a message to me to be like, you need to create a change in yourself. Otherwise, you're not going to live, a fulfilling life. And now, just to tell people, I'm in my 30s, in my late 30s, and I hike mountains all over the world, no problem. Like going up and down mountains should be hard on the knees, right? But it's not. And so I'm hiking, I'm doing all these sports, and maybe not to the hardcore extent that I was in the beginning, but it's still, I have an enjoyable, fulfilling athletic life, like a movement based life that's wonderful. And that's what people really want,
Mm.
right? At the end of the day, is to stay mobile. So, just by exchanging out those patterns of mine, and people will say, what were they? And I actually can't remember at this moment what they exactly were because I've exchanged out other ones as well. But I would say to people if they're starting to question themselves in this, it's like, well, look at your whole life. And I would go into a couple patterns that I see that are key for people. It's like, are you self-sabotaging yourself? And I'm not saying just physically, but are you sabotaging yourself mentally and finding ways you cannot do
Mm.
things? Or are you exchanging it out? Like your marathon runner guy who did something amazing. And I want to meet this guy. And, he got through it. And it's not the attitude of saying, well, just get it done. I'm just going to do it anyway. Right. It's actually about the enjoyment and fulfillment of doing what we love doing.
Mm.
Right. So the self-sabotage pattern has to get exchanged out. The other one I see is a lack of abundance. Okay, so people will say, oh, well, my parents were like this, so I'm going to be like
Mm.
this, right? And so it's like living this, I call it a generational pattern, and it lives in your DNA. And sometimes we'll play out exactly how our parents raised us, and we'll play out their story, or we'll play out a story of who we think we need to be to receive their
Mm.
love as well.
Yeah.
Mhm. And so this sounds all really deep, and your athletes are probably saying, well, how the heck how do I find out that relationship and so on? And the one beauty about athletes, they have
Mm.
self-awareness. That's the first step, is that self-awareness. Like the guy who came into you and said, I'm in pain, what can we do here? Like they have that self-awareness, and usually they have motivation looped in
Yeah.
with that somewhere. to want to move forward. So, get motivated about discovering yourself and your patterns of how you grew up. And there'll be trends across the board for everyone, but we might just view and live them out a little bit differently.
Yeah, it's interesting when you're talking about, your ankle. It was to do with your stability and knees moving forwards, and your hips. It was empowerment. It reminded me of Inna Segal's book, The Secret Language of Your Body, because she talks about all the different body parts and potentially what issues could be causing an issue in that area of the body. But interestingly, as you were speaking, I started thinking about archetypes, and then you mentioned about people sabotaging, right? So there's your saboteur archetype right there. The other book that sprang to mind as you were speaking then as well was The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton. Amazing book. I think that's quite a groundbreaking book for most of the people that have read it. I should say, because obviously still a lot of people that are not aware of it. But when you realize, how much of what we do is subconscious, it's quite scary. And again, I know we spoke a little bit about it before we started recording, but in 2020 and 2021, there was a lot of people doing things subconsciously that they would have thought in their own mind that they were making conscious decisions, but quite often they were subconscious. But that's a whole nother episode.
I'm happy to do that episode sometime. That'll be a 5-hour episode, Lee. 5-hour episode. I agree with all what you said. So Bruce Lipton was, I went in and studied his information when I was doing my PhD, because I was like, okay, how, what does this guy know that I don't know about people and about healing and about the inner work and so on. And then I got into my teacher, Dr. Angela Longo, and she's written a book called Quantum Wave Living. It's a quantum wave living workbook, actually. And for people that really want to do the deep dive into themselves, because no two people live the same patterns. That's why we're all different, right? So I would say what my knee pain is about not moving forward, for example, or not understanding how I want to move forward, is probably not the same pattern as the next person with knee pain, right? So everyone will get so individualized, and that is epigenetics, actually. It's how we pattern ourselves to live in our environments, and no two people are the same. So our patterns will never be the same. And like if we put two marathon runners side by side of your clients, let's say, and gave them that same information and so on, I bet you it'd play out differently for each of them based on their own patterning, right? So when I got into Dr. Angela's work, what I realized is and this might get into 2020 a little bit and ruffle up a few feathers, but oh well. But when 2020 came along, I realized how many people had sabotaged themselves based on their own fear. Okay. And when fear takes over, we tend to go into what we call fight or flight, let's say. Okay. Like we're in a stress state. And when we're living in that stress state, it's really difficult to make decisions to move forward or to get out of that. I mean, I don't know about you. I've been in a fight or flight state sometimes, and just my decision-making process isn't amazing at all. And so when I have the time and when I have the space and the clarity to make decisions, then I'm probably going to make the right ones. But when people are frantic or they're put in a frantic space, maybe the decisions that they're going to make aren't, conducive to their living, let's say. And so that's one thing I really came to understand during that time was how people deal with their own fear, which is another emotion. And they can sabotage, they can react. I saw a lot of reactivity. I'm sure you did as well. They can hide. Okay. That was another one, like, going into hiding or what have you. And so it's amazing how one big thing can change our lives. But I would say to people, when you start to stand in your own empowerment in your own body and really know your own body and your own self, then you'll be able to assess, okay, what situation's right for me, right? What's right for me, and how well do I know myself on this front in regards to my interaction to whatever scenario is going on. And so I can come back into like just a scenario of sport with myself and going through it. It's like, okay, and like like I got told my soccer career is over, right? Over. Well, it actually, like, I still went and played like corporate league and played like for fun and stuff like that, but I needed to know I could still play. Does that make sense? And maybe that's a proving it to myself pattern, but I just wanted to feel the satisfaction of going out and playing and having a good time. And when I got there, then my career ended, actually. And I was like, okay, I just needed to know that I could do it again, and that was, the beauty in that. And was there fear? 100%. Was there, I was definitely intimidated at the time and so on of going back out. And it was a co-ed league. So I was even playing with men. And so really with all of that, I was like, okay, anything's possible. And it all comes down to how we look into ourselves. And yeah, looking back into COVID, I actually think I'm going to say this in a way that I hope people don't misinterpret, but it was a gift in a way that I think people could use it as a tool to see themselves differently, to see the world differently, and to interact and grow communities differently. That's how I see it. But I'll leave that one there for you. Yeah.
No, I completely understand what you're saying. Yeah, there's definitely an opportunity for growth there, but not everyone's grasped that just yet. But anyway, we'll move on.
Yeah, and then let's put that into healing, right? Like there's different levels of healing as well. And this comes down really to self-awareness. And I would love to make a chart on this one day. We could probably do it together. But it's like there's the people who come in, and you've probably seen this in clinical as well. And by the way, I'm saying this, and if you're one of these people, it's not bad. It's just where you're at on your journey. So I wouldn't even create a hierarchy. I'd make it a circle or something, because they're not good or bad. But, you go in and maybe you're dependent on the medical system. So every time there's a problem, you go to your doctor and you want your doctor to solve everything for you because that's what you believe doctors do. Okay. And so there's a trust there, right? And maybe there has been no self-awareness on someone's journey of learning about their own body. Personally, I think learning about our own body should be absolutely put into schools when kids are young, but hey, topic for another day as well. So they don't know anything about their body. They haven't gone into that, and they're quite dependent on their doctor. Okay, fine. And then they say, okay, well, my doctor's maybe not helping me fulfill my needs. I would need to go into seeing an alternative practitioner. So they would come to see probably someone like you, someone about performance, someone, maybe an osteopath, maybe a functional medicine doctor, diving in a little bit deeper to have more of like a holistic look, let's say, right? And okay, great. And then it comes into, okay, I'm going to take all these tools with my practitioner and do them myself as well. So I'm going to apply what I'm learning instead of constantly going and getting fixed. I'm going to apply what I'm learning and I'm going to live it. Great. And so then they become a little bit more independent, and then they start to ask questions of like, okay, how can I keep improving? And then it'll eventually come into, okay, what energy am I living? What patterns am I living? How am I creating in my days? What am I creating in my days? Am I constantly creating pain? Okay, what does that mean? I had a girl who lived with headaches her whole entire life. And I can say it came back finally. And she went to everybody. So she went on this whole journey. She went and she had like MRIs, she had scans, she had everything. And she went down a path of saying, okay, well, guess I'm just going to live with headaches for the rest of my life. And I said, well, okay, do you want to? And she goes, no, obviously, that's why I'm here. And so we went back and I used Angela's method. And basically the method, involves a lot of muscle testing on her body because she has a frequency, like our skin's kind of like a lie detector, right? And, you can feel when you're around someone, you're like, well, that's safe, that's not safe. And so, I muscle tested for her, and we had to go back to the day she was in grade 1. And she went into grade 1, and what had happened is her lunch exploded in her bag. Okay. And so you know how that happens with kids. Their lunchbox opens, it goes all over the bag, whatever. And her teacher had picked up the bag and dumped it all over the carpet and, really embarrassed her in front of all the kids. And all the kids laughed at her. And so anytime there was something where she became the center of attention, she would get a headache. Okay. And she was in a performance scenario. So she goes, every time I go into a performance scenario, I get a headache. And it came down to that moment where she was in a scenario completely embarrassed, completely unsupported. And so we had to replace in her being supported, like supporting herself. We had to replace in her that embarrassment, the feeling of embarrassment. And I think, if I remember her words correctly, she said, I felt really put down. Okay. And she'd been living that moment unconsciously,
Mm,
like you had said, for her whole life. And it was creating headaches because it was a stressor for her. So every time she'd come in, her body knew a pattern to stress up and create some kind of headache in the bottom suboccipital area. And off she went. She'd have that same pattern until we actually went back and replaced that scenario that programmed her all the way through to her 20, I think she's 28, 29 years.
mm,
So that's how powerful the work can be and how specific the work can be around helping people get through their, I'm going to call it unwanted patterns,
mm,
because I don't want to judge
mm,
it. But the unwanted patterns that people are living that they don't even
mm,
know. And then they don't even understand the power of themselves. It's like you can exchange that out and have something completely
mm,
new. And her wording is, I think I have a testimonial from her, but her wording was something around, feeling really fulfilled in everything that she was doing. And she was in performance. She was in like track and field. So her wording was just around like how freeing it actually felt to like go and perform again. And that's, what she was always looking for. And then it got to be kind of a pattern where it was not feeling so toasty easy for her. So I say to all the athletes and all the people in rehab and all the people going on their journey this way in their body, so your body. Like if they're listening to this now, they're interested in knowing their body, right? And it's like dive a little bit deeper and go back into your childhood and think of a situation, maybe a coach or a teacher or a parent that shaped you, whether it was positive or negative for you, it doesn't really matter, but just even think about how it shaped you and look at where that played out in your life going
mm,
forward. And that is, the power of the human. So you can recreate that pattern and then you recreate your reality in that
mm,
moment. And that's healing. That's healing to me. That's how far I've gone on my journey. There's probably more
mm.
that I don't know, but here I am. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
hmm
we're all still very much learning, aren't we? Even though, I was thinking about it earlier, I've been studying human health for 32 years. And, I'm quite prolific in my studies. Like, and I know I've probably read, I don't know, 30 books this year, which for a slow reader is quite a lot. But I still feel like I've probably got 400 books on my wish list, you know, and I'm sure I'll never get around to reading them for as long as I live. But, there's just so much, there's so much to learn. Just coming back to pain, I think you've touched on it a little bit, but I think maybe we could go into a bit more depth, if you like. In your view, what do you think creates chronic pain? Did you know that 92% of people fail to follow through on their New Year's resolutions? That's right. Year after year, most of us start strong and then lose momentum by February. Sound familiar? But what if this year could be different? What if you finally had the tools to make your goals stick? Introducing Stickability, a simple, effective, and affordable program designed to help you overcome the cycle of failed resolutions. In just a short time, you'll learn how to create lasting habits without wasting hours or breaking the bank. This isn't just another plan. It's the solution to finally sticking to your healthy lifestyle goals. Don't let this year be like the last. Head over to stickabilitycourse.com now to enroll. It's affordable, easy to follow, and packed with tools to make 2025 the year that you have the ability to make it stick.
I think carrying the same pattern over and over again will create chronic pain. So let's go into just fight or flight
Mm,
mode. Okay. People know this, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. So, how one person decides to live stress and then how they hold on to that stress over time will create something chronic or painful. So I'm trying to think something chronic that comes into the office. I see a lot of
mhm,
arthritis, actually. It's a big one that I see. And people go, Ann, what do I need to do to get rid of my arthritis? And it's like, well, I think the big question is, what have you been
mm,
doing? Okay. So getting a screenshot, a little snapshot of their life. So let's take, a client that I have in my head at the moment, beautiful man. He goes, oh yeah, I said, well, what do you eat for lunch? Peanut butter sandwich every day for his whole life. A peanut butter sandwich. Now just let's think about what that peanut butter sandwich might be doing over a long period of time, right? Is it going to be nurturing his body? Oh, and I'm going to say on white bread as well. That's what it is. Peanut butter sandwich on white bread. And I'm not knocking peanut butter sandwiches, but it's something I wouldn't choose to nurture my body. And so, over time, I would say, okay, let's say, how many peanut butter sandwiches have you had? And he's like, oh, like hundreds, hundreds. And I said, well, do you think that's a food, for example, that could be exchanged out for something new? So we draw awareness to the patterns that he was living. He goes, well, I could give something else a try. And I said, well, let's, get you some protein, first of all, right? And get you some protein to decrease some inflammation. So there's, a step one right there of one pattern out of many that can be exchanged, right? And then, so we start to exchange out those patterns. But then, we dove into, his deep, deep arthritis. And interestingly enough, as a child, he had a very difficult childhood, extremely difficult. And he started to create some, autoimmune issues as a kid. He said, well, I started to have stiff joints as a kid. And I said, well, why? And he goes, gosh, every time I get hit by my dad, I just kind of freeze out and I couldn't quite loosen myself up. And so what we did is I still worked on him. We worked on the joints, we worked on the nutrition, which was creating pain. Okay. But then we also had to couple it with revisiting his childhood experiences of being abused. Okay. And by the way, the arthritis was in the back of his hip. Okay. And he'd usually get hit there. Okay. A lot of kids get spanked, right? And so he was living that moment. And it was really interesting because the method that I used with him in the office was I said, okay, as I'm working on this area, tell me what's coming up for you. And tears, started coming out. All the energy that he'd been carrying for so long started coming out of his body because he's like, wow, I can't believe that my body has been hanging on to those moments of my childhood, and creating this stiffness in me throughout everything. And that I was really choosing to live that. And so we work on the joint, but then we also want to actually exchange out consciously, like you were saying, the emotion of what he was feeling. So then we had to go back and replace like the sadness. I think he had some fear. I can't remember quite all the words that he was using, but it's definitely sadness and fear and probably feeling a bit diminished in a way. And so we wanted to recreate that in him with empowerment, with standing like in his own sovereignty because he didn't need to, look at his father as authoritative figure anymore, which, he had problems with authority going through life, right? Based on that model as a child, which I think is a great story for 2020 as well. But, so, how he viewed authority and lived it out is exactly, what he was creating in his life over and over again. So I think that took us probably about 8 hours in total, not in that session, but we worked at it for about 8 hours. And now he's at a point where, time to time, he has a little bit of arthritis coming back. He has to look at his lifestyle and what he's living and so on. But the majority of the pain and stiffness that was there all day, every day is gone. And so people think they have to live with this and they think it's absolute. Nothing in the body is absolute. We're constantly moving. We're constantly healing. And the myth that we're taught of when we get older, well, this is just how it's going to be. Again, not true. You can exchange out those old patterns. They just might be a little bit of a longer journey if you're 70, whatever, right? But of looking how many times you've lived those patterns over and over again, that's okay. But you can still exchange out those patterns and live something new even when you're in your 70s and 80s. So the myth of us getting older and dying with chronic disease or having chronic disease, to me, it's all a myth. It's all a pattern of living. And I actually firmly, and I'll stand by this, I don't believe people need to have it ever. They can, map it out and get rid of it in their body. Is it going to happen overnight with some people who have really deep chronic issues, especially autoimmune and things like that? Probably not. That'll take time. But, I've had people that come in with, hip pain and it's gone in one session and they figured out the pattern and that's great. And they don't recreate it ever again because they got it. And then, you have others who have much more complex stories in their life that they have to go back and revisit and say, okay, this is probably a slew of different relationships and patterns I've had in my life that I'm living in this area, and I'm embodying it. I'm embodying all the fear. I'm embodying all the sadness. I'm embodying all the trauma in my body. So I have to exchange that out in order to not have it be painful for
Mm.
me. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, for sure. Something that I asked someone else, another guest recently, and something I discussed on another podcast, just quite interested to get your view. What about when it comes to acute pain? Do you see that differently compared to chronic pain? Attention, all radical health rebels. Are you ready to uncover the truth the authorities don't want you to know? We've just launched our Radical Health Rebel channel on Rumble. Here's the deal. We're bringing you the first half of our subscriber-only episodes for free. That's right, free access to the hard-hitting, eye-opening conversations that dig into the topics mainstream platforms won't touch. Whether it's cutting-edge health insights, exposing hidden agendas, or sharing tools to thrive in challenging times, this is your chance to stay informed without subscribing to the podcast. Tune in on Rumble to keep track of what's really going on in the world and join a growing community of truth seekers. Don't miss out. Search Radical Health Rebel on Rumble and start watching today. Because knowledge is power, and it's time to take yours back.
I would look at it all as an energy, no matter what. Now, okay, wait, let me go back. The past me would have said, "Ooh, they're super different." But at the end of the day, it's still a pattern that we've chosen to create in our bodies. And it's maybe a decision that we've made to get there. So I would go back and say, okay, what's the decision of why someone chose to get there? And what are they creating in themselves at the moment? So we would still treat it maybe a bit differently in the clinic, because acute and chronic is probably a different treatment depending on who's doing what. But I would still always do the pattern behind it, no matter what, because there'll be a reason why that person showed up and made the choice that they chose. Even maybe they were having pain in the beginning and they decided to go through it with it anyway, whatever it was, and so on and so forth. So it's quite interesting why we choose what we choose, if that makes sense. And a lot of people are going through this world. I'm not trying to put people, I think we're trying to learn more about ourselves and create more conscious living within ourselves. And many people are choosing different paths of where to go and how to do that, to learn about who they really are. And I think that's a beautiful thing. But when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, all that we need to do is look within ourselves and our own patterns of our own living in our own life, because naturally each one of us knows our own life better than anybody else, right? And so you'll know all of your experiences, and then you start to replace out those experiences, because with a quantum wave, and I'm just going to go back to a little bit of physics around this, is when you exchange out that wave, it connects to what we would say a source. So some people will call it source, some people call it God, some people call it the universe, some people, what it is a stored energy in the universe. And all the physicists can come on and help explain that, because I'm not a physicist. But, our energy does get stored somewhere and we have access to it. And that's how we constantly recreate on this planet is, we'll have access to an energy, so to speak, and we'll get an idea, or we'll think about someone and they'll call us like your patient did. And that's all us, connecting into a source and creating an energy. And I think people think, okay, well, I can live with that. I'm connected to a source. That's great. The source will do it for me. It's not true. You are the embodiment of that source. So you've chosen of how you want to interact with it, and you can change your interaction with it. And so if you're born with something, it doesn't mean that you have to interact the same way with it. Am I saying, okay, a person that's been wheelchair bound their whole life is going to walk? Well, maybe not. I don't know. I think it depends on the circumstance and the person, but I think they can view themselves differently. I think they can live their patterns differently. If they're living in a sabotage state, they could live without a sabotage state, and that changes anything that they're capable of doing, wheelchair or not wheelchair. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I could imagine it would be very easy, if you were in a wheelchair, to be a victim, right? Or to feel like a victim. That would be very easy.
Oh, that's a good word. Yeah. What's the word I was looking
Yeah.
for? Yeah.
But obviously, as you were saying, you don't necessarily have to. I mean, there's a guy that works at the gym where I work out. I think I'm guessing he was born with spina bifida, and he's not. I mean, sometimes I've seen him walk, but most of the time he's in a wheelchair. But he exudes confidence, right? He
Mm-hmm.
walks around like someone who's 6'4" tall, you know, and he gives off an energy of he doesn't give off the energy of someone in a wheelchair. That's the best way that I can put it, really. Um, maybe that's a front. I don't know, but I don't get the impression it is at all. I just get the impression that he's confident in who he is. Just happens to be in a wheelchair,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. And so it's an energy,
Mm,
right? It's an energy. And then uh, really, as humans, what we do, and we don't even realize this is how kind of unconscious we are, but at the same time, how incredibly powerful we are. So I hope people take this away. It's like when you're in a situation, ask yourself, what you're thinking and how you're feeling, because all of that is a wave. It's a message. And so start to trust it, right? And then if you're constantly having the same thought pattern over and over again and you're realizing it, for example, I don't know, you look at someone and you constantly judge them. That's an internal self judgment as well, because what we see on the outside of ourselves exists on the inside of
mm,
ourselves. So if we're seeing something like confidence, it's because it exists in you as well. Because we're having an interaction, a quantum wave interaction with that person,
mm,
whether we're talking to them or not. Okay. So if we're constantly judging somebody else, it's because the judgment lives inside
mm,
of us. If we're constantly putting down somebody, it's because it lives inside of
mm,
us. So this actually creates a whole new conversation of how humans
mm,
interact. Because when someone comes up to us, okay, and they're accusing me of something and I feel sad, I probably want to replace that sadness with something else. And then when I replace that sadness and the person comes up and accuses me of something again, perhaps I can be in a space of actually hearing their pain behind the
mm,
accusation. Does that
mm.
make sense? Instead of
Yeah.
reacting. And so the more we react, the more we get sad, the more we live in fear, the more we live in anger, all these things, it's going to drain our energy. And in my opinion, it ages
Mm,
people. It ages people, and that creates a disease
mm,
state. Disease,
mm,
right? Disease state. And so we know, and the bigger question is, what if we never even knew anger on the planet? Like, I wondered what it would look like if people just didn't even know anger existed, right? It's a big
mm,
question, but like, what would the planet look
mm,
like? It'd look a heck of a lot different. And so when you learn to eliminate it out of yourself more and more and more, you start to fill it with things that actually benefit you more. You start to see the world differently. We start to show up differently, and your energy is different in that room. So you can have impact based on who you believe you are in that
mm,
space. So if you believe you can heal yourself, you're going to, attract in a way all the people that believe they can heal themselves as well.
mm,
Okay, so we attract what we are, we create what we are. And this guy, I would love to have a conversation with him and wonder, like, see how he views
mm,
himself. Because when we can see that, we know a lot of how they'll live their pain. So for any practitioner, any coach listening to this, it's so important to hear the person's story. Oftentimes we go in and we say, okay, where's your pain? I'm going to fix it. Right. But like, I guess I take a little bit longer in my appointments now, and I teach practitioners online as well. And what I teach them is to actually come in and say, it is so important to hear the cry and the pain behind what they're
mm,
presenting. So they might come in and say, okay, I have lower back pain, but it's all right. Just fix me up and off I go. My question would be like, okay, well, where did it come in the first place? And where does it live? And why does it live there? And so the more deeper questions we ask, the more deeper answers we get. And we start to learn about these people and how they've programmed themselves, whether it's conscious or not, of what they're living. And if we can help them exchange that out, they don't need to carry that pain
mm,
anymore. And that's my goal, is to come to a space where it's like, okay, I want people to be able to do this for themselves. And sit there and be like, okay, I can actually exchange out old pain for
mm.
new. Have you ever heard of
Of course,
homeopathy?
yeah.
It's pretty yeah, it's pretty popular
Mm,
in the UK as well. Maybe not as much in North America, but I love it. It's similar to homeopathy. If anyone's ever taken homeopathy, it's a remedy that they choose for you that brings out something old in your body. So some people take remedies, and so what Western medicine does is you take ibuprofen or Advil is the brand name of ours. And it suppresses, the inflammation in a
Mm.
way. What I like to look at is let's bring out the inflammation. Let's exchange it out. Okay. So the inflammation never has to live in there and it doesn't have to create scar tissue and so on and so forth. And same with homeopathy, they choose a remedy that brings things
Mm.
out. So some people go on these remedies and I don't know, they end up I'm just trying to think of an example. They end up getting like eczema or something like that, right? It's an old energy coming out that was probably suppressed in the body from a choice that they'd made in the past. Could be like an old medication that didn't suit them or an old sickness that was living in them and so on. So the body gets really complex. And let's say that old sickness lives in them, it can create some kind of disease or some autoimmune or something chronic in the future. I'm not saying humans are perfect and that they'll never have a problem, but it's constantly exchanging out what we're creating is so incredibly important. And I do believe people need to go back and look at everything that they've ever even put in their body and ask themselves, is this going to really benefit
Mm.
me? And just as an example, for me, if I go to the dentist, I can't get frozen. Whatever's in that, I throw up. I have no idea what it is, but it does not suit me at all, right? And so I've had to go in. If I have to go into the dentist, I don't do anything. I don't do any freezing or anything like that. And they think I'm crazy. But like whatever's in that cannot live in my system, so my system rejects it. And there's a homeopathic remedy I can take before I go into the dentist and so on. But um, then it questions me. Like I can actually go into the dentist and I'm totally fine with whatever work they're doing. But, why do we have all that stuff that we're injecting in the first place? And how is it affecting people? How is it affecting people long term? Is it actually really healthy for us to get cortisol injections constantly for pain? Or should we just learn how to deal with the pain in a different way?
Mm.
So these are all really good questions to be asking ourselves based on a model that we're told to live in or options that we're given. And then there's other options that people can choose as well. And I think it's important they know there's other
Mm.
options.
Yeah, just getting back to looking at chronic and acute pain, I think what's quite interesting, I don't know if the studies have ever been done, but I would be quite confident if you studied native hunter-gatherer tribes, I think you'd struggle to find chronic pain in those people.
Mm. Like the ones who have trained and lifted and so on and so forth.
Well, I'm talking about people like, the Maasai warriors that, they're still living in a natural environment. They're not living in the Western world. They're not pumped full of, propaganda and, they're not manipulated and then they're not worrying about paying a mortgage and they're not worrying about paying their taxes and all that kind of stuff. They just wake up every day and think, okay, where are we going to get our food from today? Right. And they spend a few hours doing that. And then the rest of the day, they're playing with their kids. Right. So it'd be quite interesting to do that study that those that are still living in alignment with nature, whether they had chronic pain. My guess would be if they do, it would be very, very small amount or small percentage of those people.
I agree. I never thought about it, but I did look up. I'd looked at the 7 blue zones during the blue zones, right? I don't know the 7 blue zones off by heart, but there's one in Italy, there's California, Costa Rica, Japan, and what are the other ones?
Can't remember.
I don't know. Yeah, but so there's different. What the point is, there's different parts of the world, and people living in certain ways, but there's a commonality between all of them. And I don't know about certain tribes and so on. I've never actually studied those, but I did look pretty deeply into the blue zones. And when I was doing the epigenetics component and how we express ourselves in certain environments, and a big part of it was community. And so if we look, all of them had a supported community. And, people had their own certain talents that they were good at, that they were able to give to the community. And I can say, when people do come into the clinic, I do hear a lot of loneliness and how lonely they are. So that's interesting to me and how that would play out. I don't actually know how to measure that. I'm sure there's a way, but like the loneliness and community factors is quite big, especially, when people get elderly. And then the other thing is, the elderly in the community, are taken care of by the younger generation. And what do we do now? Well, I mean, I wouldn't do this with my family, but generally in North America, I don't know if it's the same where you are, but they get put in a home. Um, so they go into what's called an old age home. And I wonder, how conducive that is to them having longevity and having young kids around and, having to take care of something and so on. Because, when we have things to take care of, or like a purpose in life, I believe it gives us a little bit more life. And so what are these guys' purposes of waking up every day? Well, they wake up and they have to provide for their family, and they find their food that day, and that's what they do, and that's their purpose. So if that's fulfilling to them without all the other stressors and worries, then great. I would say too, like all the stressors we do have in our daily lives, like the taxes and the mortgages and things like that, I do think that we can change our perspective of how we view it as well. And this might come down to a conversation around, abundance and how we view abundance and what we actually need versus what we're trying to get. And so there's a common phrase used over in North America called keeping up with the Joneses. And basically what it means is you're comparing yourself, to your neighbor and trying to get everything that they want because you believe or someone believes that they'll have a better life if they have all these things. And one thing I've learned on that path, and maybe this relates into the 7 blue zones and so on, is it's more about the inner fulfillment that we have in our life and how we view that and how we live it. It's more about that inner love and joy we have when we're doing anything. So just a personal note, I've had everything and I've had nothing. I really have. And story for maybe another day, but I've actually had nothing. And it was all about, someone couldn't take away my integrity. They couldn't take away my character. They can't take away my values or my love for myself and so on. Does that make sense? And so, when we can live that for ourselves, and I could live with pain and that, and some of the times were painful. I'm not going to lie and say it was all rainbows and lollipops. It was painful, but I can choose to view that differently and come forward as a different person. Or I could choose, like you said, to live, in a victim mentality in a way. And over time, I probably would have created something chronic, if I wasn't able to get myself out of, an acute situation. And I'll say situation because it's not always pain. It's not always, breaking a leg or pulling a muscle. Like those things are all, hunky dory, but there's big situations in our lives too. And we can choose to live those out a little bit differently as well. So they do not create something chronic in the future. But I'm going to just toss one in there that a lot of people know is, divorce, right? So how many people do we know in our lives who've been divorced and are still living incredibly unhappy? Or they're in a marriage and they're still incredibly unhappy. They just, complain. And to me, like all of that's a choice. Everything in life's a choice. If people want to go live off grid and they think that's fulfilling, then go do it. If they want to be divorced, do it. If you want to live fulfilled in a marriage, do it. It's how our perception of it is expressing in a way in that environment. So people will sometimes come in and blame their chronic pain on their significant other. And I can't quite fathom that. I'm like, well, they aren't causing you the pain per se. You're the one creating it. You're the one staying in the situation. And so that accountability piece is so important. And I think there's going to be a lot of naysayers will say, oh, what if I'm abused and so on? And I get it. It's probably not easy to stay in situations like that. And speaking from personal experience, but at some point, you have to stand up for yourself. You have to be the one to be like, I'm not going to be doing this anymore. And I'm going to move forward a little bit differently. And the same goes for training. Okay. So I'm talking about all these, life events and stuff, but like if you train the exact same way all the time without looking of how you want to improve or change yourself, you're probably going to end up with the same result, right? So go searching for ways to change, go searching for ways to improve, go searching for ways to make even little tweaks in yourself to constantly improve, because there are going to be ways to improve out there. And then most of all, to avoid something chronic, love the journey. If we're not loving the journey and everyone's showing up to the gym and training in a certain way, and it got like that for me in certain things, so I stopped doing it. But, if I go and I train in a certain way and I'm like, okay, this isn't fun for me anymore, it's not fulfilling. One, maybe I want to look at why I'm thinking that way. Okay. Because there's probably a bit of fun in there somewhere. And two, maybe I change into something else. If I'm weightlifting and it's not feeling fun, maybe I go and I go dancing, a totally different energy, a totally different way to move my energy and to move my body. But at the same time, I'm getting movement and I'm getting joy in what I'm doing, potentially with the dancing versus the weightlifting. I like both, but it's just, if you can see how we change our attitudes and how we show up differently to it, you can do that with anything. We can do that with rehab. We can do that with chronic disease. We can do that with how we're living and how we even view the whole entire world. And when we do that and we start speaking differently about it, we start to create new patterns. A new conversation starts, right? Like this is a new conversation. And then we start to create different ways of living because we're having new conversations. And so people can create new. It's not going to be the same old all the time, which I think is wonderful. And that goes into acute pain, that goes into chronic pain, and so on. You just exchange it out and live something new.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Yeah. What's interesting, I think, part of the Czech philosophy is the concept of the pain teacher. So that whenever we're in pain, it's our body's way of trying to tell us something. And to a degree, the way that I look at it is that if it's a chronic pain, the likelihood is that it's something that's subconscious that the pain is trying to make your conscious mind aware of. Right. So, and again, we've been talking about lots of different things, and you talk about patterns that people are holding, things like that. With acute pain, I think certainly in some instances, again, it is still the subconscious mind communicating to the conscious mind to teach something. But I think sometimes if it's an acute injury or acute pain, it can be a bit more obvious. So it might be, don't put your hand near the fire, or be a bit more careful when you're using that chainsaw next time, right? with the one arm you've got left, or be careful what you do with those scissors, right? Don't put your hand on a hot plate, whatever. But when it comes to chronic pain, I think finding let's call it the root cause is more difficult. I think it's often easier to find the message in an acute situation. Now there might be a deeper thing, and we've discussed that, right? As you said, why does someone choose to play rugby? Why does someone choose to do MMA, right? Then they might be injury free for 4 years, and then someone gets them in a hold and they sprain their ankle ligaments, right? But I guess what I'm trying to say is, most of the time, in my experience, chronic pain is not so obvious to work out what that thing is that's the root cause. Just moving on, you've mentioned quantum wave living. Can you explain a bit more about what it actually is and how does it relate to eliminating chronic pain from the body?
Okay, so I got to backtrack a little bit, because when I went into genetics and studying genetics, I thought, Eureka, I've done it. I can help anyone heal. And that wasn't true at all. It wasn't. And why it wasn't true is because, everyone will keep recreating something in a moment, right? So what's a really common one these days? I'm going to go into weight loss because, weight loss looks different on everybody. You've probably worked with people with weight loss before, or getting them to a certain point of performance. And it's like everyone's journey around it looks a little bit different, and why they got there in the first place is going to be different. And then I thought, okay, if I pop their genetics on top of it, we'll get them really fast weight loss, or really easy kind of weight loss for them. And off they go. And, when I coupled people together in their gene pools, it actually worked. It did work. But the issue was some people, I wouldn't see them for 6 months and then they come back and the weight's on again. And I thought, okay, great, we've turned off those genes and so on, but it's the habits that they were creating and that they didn't exchange out that was creating the weight again. So I actually hadn't quite done it in helping somebody get totally over those patterns when they were going through, let's say, weight loss. I needed to go a little bit deeper and say, well, why? And someone would say it's psychology. And I'd say, well, no, it's actually how we're interacting with ourselves on a daily basis. And it goes into everything we do. It's not just psychology. It's not just genetics. It's not just nutrition. It's all of it. And so I was like, well, how do you explain that? And then when I met Angela, she said, well, it's information, she calls it. So she calls it information stacked into a quantum wave, and you interact with everything that you deal with. And so your patterns behind what you're interacting with is what's going to create your outcome. So let's put Ann in front of a Toblerone bar. I love Toblerone bars, by the way. They're amazing. Is Ann going to be able to say no to the Toblerone bar around Christmas time? Heck no. I love those things. But so, I'll have one. But let's say, I eat the whole bar in one shot. Okay, why did I choose to do that? And why couldn't I stop myself? What's the pattern? And people will be like, oh, Ann, you're sabotaging yourself. Yeah, I am. But, why did I choose to go down that path for myself and create, inflammatory responses and a sugar rush and so on, and potentially turn on a diabetic gene if I have one, and so on and so forth. So why did I choose to do that? And that's where the patterning, the quantum wave patterning comes in, because I need to go and look at my pattern of why I chose it in that moment. And let's just call it a self-sabotage pattern. And then, what we can do is muscle test where else in my life I learned to self-sabotage myself. So let's take me back to, maybe 4 or 5 years old. When, for example, and this happens a lot in a lot of families, when somebody's upset or sad, they get a candy to feel better, or they get sugar or something to feel better, right? Oh, here you go. I hope this makes you feel better. I'm just going to give you sweets. So maybe I'm standing in front of the Toblerone bar at age 39 and saying, I don't really feel good right now. I'm going to eat this whole thing to feel good because it gives me that that feeling of fulfillment. But I haven't gone back and looked at my 5-year-old self as when I was sad, my way of dealing with the sadness was eating the Toblerone bar, right? So we can see how people get into something chronic, can't we? Right? Instead of calling them a name and being like, oh, they just don't work out, they probably work out, but it's like, what else are they sabotaging in their life? And what have they been through in their life that's creating that moment now? So the quantum wave living method goes back to that 5-year-old self. And then we exchange out that particular pattern. But, let's go. And then we start going through their life chronologically. So at 5, let's say we exchange out that self-sabotage pattern, and then we muscle test again. Are they living this pattern at 12, at 20, and so on? Okay, let's go to 22 years old, where the sadness was still there, and this person turned into an alcoholic and started abusing their body based on alcohol, right? Because they learned a different way of sabotaging themselves, but instead of choosing, the candy or whatever, they've chosen alcohol now. Okay, and that's going to create a total different response in their body. Genes are going to express differently. We can say it'll turn into something chronic at some point. It might not, depending on what they do. And if they don't break the pattern, they could go down a serious, deep, dark hole. And this is how it works. And so, sometimes psychology would say, well, just talk about it. And I had done that, by the way. I'd been to counselors and I've talked about it, this problem, but you stay in the problem. The quantum wave living exchanges out the energy and puts in something consciously new. And we have to do it at that age to make sure it doesn't exist anymore, because technically time is man-made. And so what we live now is potentially our past as well. Does that make sense to you? So, here's me with that Toblerone bar situation. I'm like totally giving Toblerone bars a knock on this, but I love that. And so basically, we want to take that person in that moment back to their 5-year-old selves to know that they can make a different decision in this moment, and maybe to to their 22-year-old selves, and so on and so forth. And it goes for every single topic that we've ever lived. This was just one easy one to explain of how people can express themselves differently based on how they're living their sadness. And their sadness might show up in that kind of self-sabotaging eating way. That's just one example out of many that I've seen. And so that's how the method works, and why I believe it's the way we need to go is recreating, connecting to source. And so when I recreate myself in that moment and I connect to, let's say, source or the universe, I recreate a different outcome. So say you go, hey, Anne, Merry Christmas. Here's your Toblerone bar. I heard you like them. And I say, oh, thanks. Maybe I'll have a little piece and you share one with you. And then just enjoy the moment of having one, but, not eat the whole bar, for example. Or I might even get to the point where I'll say, okay, I'll save it for later. These kind of things. But just going into the pattern of why I made that decision in the first place is so important. So that relates into everything that somebody does. Why are they doing it in the first place? Okay. Are they doing it with joy? Are they doing it with fun? Are they doing it feeling light? If they are, then chances are they might not create some kind of injury. They might not create, because it's fun. They're in that flow state, if you will. But when it becomes difficult, when they're doing it with fear, when they're doing it with anger, when they're doing it with force, they might overdo it in a way. And then that's where it comes up the patterns that they probably don't want to keep and we want to exchange out. And I can go a little bit further, but I'll let you comment first.
Yeah, no, go a little bit further. Please do.
Well, where I wanted to go a little bit further is to help people understand how unique they really are. Because so there's you, Lee, on this planet, who's a unique individual who hasn't had the same experiences as me, Anne. And it makes both of us unique, which makes for like a really wonderful conversation. And on this planet, no two people have had the same experiences. You can even take twins and they'll view their life experiences different, even if they grew up in the same household. Okay. And they're identical twins. They'll still have different experiences, different kind of ways of expressing themselves. So my whole thing on this is when I learned that and I understood it through epigenetics, which is like Bruce Lipton's work, and how you can change your belief systems, you can change basically anything about yourself and express differently. I thought, okay, so what do we do? Do we live on this planet saying we just need to exchange out these patterns and we live this kind of happy life? No, the answer is no. I think we can do a little bit more. What it's all about is really going into discovering our own unique purposes. And so Lee, you, for example, on this planet's had these unique experiences and gaining all this knowledge, and you have all this wisdom. It's like, how do you decide to show up to what you choose to do? You can choose to do whatever you want to do, whatever job you want to do, but it's how you show up and interact with your environment that is your purpose. So a lot of people, what I hear today is they're showing up with anger, or they're showing up, depressed, or they're showing up sad. And my wish for them is to discover who they actually really are behind all of that. Because I think there's people who have really great abilities to nurture one another, to guide one another. Like, to me, you seem like a guide, like you can really help people through what they need to be helped through. And so we need guides, we need nurturers, we need people who have creativity. We need all of this stuff, and how it expresses is up to the person. But when they truly know their purpose, they can live and actually serve their community a lot better. And it changes the community. It's, not this kind of depressive sort of state that, I'm going to just say it. A lot of people are really living these days. They're showing up and they're really negative and they're upset. Those are all their patterns that they don't even need to live anymore. They can exchange out and show up in a way where it's like, wow, I love what I'm doing. I'm here to share. I'm here to give and receive in my environment. And, I'm going to help the younger generation. I'm going to help. And then if we look at the big picture of this, that can create loads of change in the future rather than just being angry and passing on the anger to whoever's in our environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that's why I believe this work's important, because it not only changes how someone lives in their body and the pain that they live, but it can create, a whole new way of living in a way. We can create communities that are very supportive and safe and secure. If we live that safe and security, we can create trust again. And it has to come from within first, and we have to actually live it to have it. And so I think a lot of us are looking for the external to change, and it won't change until we change the internal first.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what?
If that's too much, you can cut that
No, it's absolutely fine. I mean, I was kind of imagining what the world could potentially be like, and it felt, what I was kind of imagining was like a utopia, right? Which actually leads me quite nicely onto my next question. If we were living in a utopian world, how do you see practitioners being trained to learn these types of methods to help people get over their pain?
Okay, great question. I believe practitioners, myself included, so I'm going to speak from my own journey because I think that's the best way to share because I know mine best. We have to know ourselves really well first. And there's practitioners out there who, really want to heal others. And I love it because I think they get in it for the right reasons. And I think there's a lot of people out there that want to help others, whether you call them a healer, practitioner, whatever. But until that internal journey work of exchanging patterns comes out, they may not see the patient differently than how they do now. And so I've created a practitioners program. Now I'm going to prelude and say I've actually been teaching it for the last year, but I needed to really refine it and make it good, to put it out there. And I'm actually doing my first one that I've launched properly on a website and not just word of mouth and things like that, in February. And so the process is, and I'll share the process with you because it might interest you, is that people come through and they start to learn how to go through patterns that we were talking about and how to read patterns and how to test for patterns and so on. But whose patterns do we work on? Our own. So I group people off and I have them working on their own. And I needed to test this first to make sure it would work. So I had small groups go through, practitioners do group work going through, and it worked. They used the concept, they helped one another get through their patterns, and then off they went. And we won't see consciously other people's patterns until we've really deeply gone through our own. And then when you're not living it, you can see it. You're like, oh my gosh, this person's totally replaying their pain all the time. I used to do that, but I don't have those patterns anymore. So I've exchanged those out, but I can really recognize them in someone else and help someone. And so that's the practitioner way in my belief. Like, I still think we'll need people to guide people through. I think coaches are amazing to have on this planet. I've loved all my coaches. And when they truly know themselves and can stay in a place of, safety and non-judgment, because it can be confronting for people to look at parts of themselves and be like, oh my gosh, I've been living that my whole life. And then some people really love living it and they don't want to exchange it because they're so attached to it. That does happen. So it's like, how does a practitioner deal with that when, someone has, I call it a quantum tantrum, and they, throw a little temper tantrum of who they are, because it does happen. Because it's so ingrained with them that they want to keep that pattern. It's very challenging for them. So, how can I support practitioners in exchanging that out and those times where they do feel like it's maybe a bit more confronting? So my first step in it is they go through their own patterns and then they take two other people through their patterns. And there's ways to know if, like, how complete they are and what they're living and so on. And then they present a case study based on their patients' patterns. And the more someone practices this, just the better we get, like anything, and so we when we bring these patterns to the table and share them with other practitioners, we all learn together. And in a practitioner's world, there's two types to me. There's people who want to share and build community, and then there's people who want to keep all their kind of trade secrets to themselves or whatever. I'm not down with the part two. I just don't operate that way. So my whole thing was, how can I share this method to practitioners? How can they create community to help one another through this? And how can we, basically help all the people in the world, because everyone's going to really need some level of this one way or another to start, eliminating pain, chronic disease on the planet, and so on. And so, that's really how I see it going now. Will it change? Maybe. And then, can these practitioners get to a point where they train other practitioners? I really hope so. And then, can that also change how we deliver some of our schooling? I hope so. So it's a big vision that I have, but, you just have to start and see where it goes.
Yeah.
That's my thoughts. Yeah.
Sounds interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any resources or books that you found useful to learn the methods that you use?
Yeah, Angela has a quantum wave living workbook. In fact, I have it just sitting right beside me. You have to excuse me. I just got it. It looks like this. Here it is. And so there's some words in there when I started that I didn't quite understand because she has quite a creative mind. And I had to I needed a coach actually to really go through it, but it's a good tool to learn what patterns not to start living. And she starts out with what are called survival patterns in the book. It's accuse, blame, complain, lie, hide, deny, justify, and judging and defending ourselves. And if we believe we constantly have to live in these states, they drain our energy all the time. So think about it. If we've lived in a defending state, just think about having to defend yourself 24/7 and you're living that pattern unconsciously. That's a really unsafe pattern probably to have. It's going to be really energy draining, right? So it's a way we're constantly viewing our world. We're always on edge. We're always looking, for something bad to happen or we have to defend ourselves or so on. It's going to be a really, energy draining pattern to live. So we can replace those out. And those survival patterns I relate into people staying and living in their fight, flight, or freeze. And so when they exchange those ones out, even to begin with, and I would tell everybody to do those. I mean, even sometimes I come back and do them on a daily. We can actually start to live a little bit more calm and have more space in our body to, bring in other information because we're not living so stressed all the time. So she starts off with those patterns. And then she took a Chinese medicine model actually and broke it down into different patterns in relation to the organs. So for example, like liver, gallbladder would be more, angry and lack of clarity. And then she's broken down it into, it's called a bath wave model. So bath wave stands for beliefs, actions, thoughts, habits, words, attitudes, values, and emotions. And you go through each one to replace those. And she explains, how to replace it on your own and how you can muscle test on your own. And people can start there if they want. And then, they can get coaching whenever they want. The practitioner's model that I'm teaching does incorporate some of this book. And then I incorporate some of the epigenetics model as well, so that they can know kind of who they're talking to and what patterns they might expect to come up. Because it's a little bit predictable based on how we've perceived our world, and then how to get them through that on the other side. And so these are basic patterns that people can start with, and then eventually, once they get the technique down, they can start getting into, okay, I have this client here in my room, or this patient. How am I going to exchange out their hip pain, and what does it mean? It's not going to mean the same thing as it was to me and the same pattern line as it is to me as it was to them. So how do I figure that out? And that's a bit of the deeper work that they can go on as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting when you mentioned those patterns. The first thing that came into my mind was politicians.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about them?
Well, if you list those patterns again, can you list them again?
Accuse, blame, complain, lie, hide, deny, justify, and judging.
Is that not what they do all the time?
Yes. Yeah, but then what are we doing, right? And that's their patterns. And so, oh geez, I mean, if I put in the way that I live my values on top of it, I would say, what would I do if a lying politician came and asked for help from me? What would I actually do? And my values would actually be, I would help them through their patterns, because maybe on the other side of it, and maybe they've done some really nasty things in their life. But if we keep putting people, in jail, for example, and so on, and they don't have the tools to turn their life around, what are we actually doing? Are we really helping them through their patterns, or are we just saying, well, good luck, you did this, so you'll be punished? I mean, they probably already are punishing themselves if they're asking for help, right? So to me, it's about helping the human if they're asking for help, no matter who they are. And whether or not I agree, I can't really picture any of them coming and asking for help. But hey, you never know.
That was my point. That's exactly what they do need, right?
A lot of people need it.
You imagine if politicians and, well, puppeticians, I think we should call them, and the people pulling their strings, we could live in a very different world if they all managed to deal with those patterns, right?
Well, let's even go a step further. If they dealt with their patterns, would they even want to be a politician anymore?
Exactly.
Right? Or like, what would communities actually look like? And how would we be able to benefit people differently if those patterns, and I'm going to the pattern I do see a lot in that whole political field is control, right? And so it's about really controlling others, and all of us, if anyone's even watching this, replace, like, if they believe they have to be in control of somebody else, we need to replace that in ourselves first. And when we do, then we can even start, creating differently as well. We don't even have to wait for them.
Yeah,
they can do their thing.
Yeah, I think we could definitely do a whole episode on that one. I've got loads of things going through in my head with you saying that, but let's leave it there. And what's next for you? What have you got in the pipeline?
So come January, I'm going to step out of clinical for a little while, because I've been in clinical now for 10 years. And I'm going really into this new practitioners program. So the first program I'm opening is for 35 people only. I wanted to take a small group through and just make sure that I'm delivering really well and giving them the tools that they need. And so I have a brand called Life Lift. It's out of the US, and it is a coaching program. And how many people do I have signed up so far? I don't know. I think I have around 10 people, 10 practitioners that are signed up and ready to go for February 2025. And I'm taking them on a journey of 12 weeks. So it is work. It's not just one of those quick kind of programs. It's a dedicated program that's going to really help people change out patterns. And I do have the part in there that I was speaking about of them taking 2 other people on the journey, because I think the application is so important. So I actually have a teaching degree, and I decided to use it. Is what I'm doing. So there you go. So I created this whole curriculum, and I'm delivering it come February. I'm super stoked about it, because I think it's a tool that people can apply in their clinic setting. And I even have a way for them to set it up financially so that they know how to sell it, they know the wording to use, and so on, because we do probably need to understand a little bit about that, and people need to understand what they're getting themselves into as well. So there's a lot of clarity around that. And that's really what I'm doing come January. So I'll be on the road a little bit. I'll be traveling a little bit. And the program is delivered online. So I'll be doing that online with a bunch of practitioners, and super excited. And honestly, I want to go a little bit hiking in some warm places. So, that's on the list too.
Yeah, sounds great. And where can people find you online, Anne?
Oh gosh. Lifelift.live is our website. And then I'm on FYIL. So I'm on Facebook. We have a Life Lift page. Instagram, I think, is lifelift.community. And I'm going to make a joke after all of this. And LinkedIn is just my name. If people want to connect and find me, I don't mind. I do check it from time to time. The funny part is I'm not a big social media person at all. But as you're growing an online business, it's, my team was like, come on, Ann. And I said, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And so people will see that some of the pages are quite new, and that's why, because, we just put it out there. So, it's growing. I have a beautiful community on our email list as well. So people go to the website, they can that's how I always used to do it, was just via email list. But now we're, breaking into the good old, social media. So it's beneficial.
Yeah. Awesome.
Mhm.
And thank you so much for your time. It's been a really interesting and educational conversation, but just thanks very much for your time.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate
My
it.
pleasure. So that's all from Anne and me for this week, but don't forget to join me same time, same place next week on the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to give the show a rating and a review, and I'll see you next time.